This meeting is being recorded.
El dosel del bosque es una experiencia inmersiva e interpretativa. El bosque seco tropical es definitivamente uno de los ecosistemas más amenazados del trópico americano. Este proyecto es un proyecto de conservación integral que busca la protección, el conocimiento y la investigación de este gran ecosistema y por eso lo hemos llamado dosel del bosque. La experiencia de dosel del bosque es única en el país porque las personas que vengan a visitarlo podrán entrar en contacto con todos los estratos del dosel del bosque, ingresando por el dosel alto donde podrán ver todas las especies de fauna y flora nativas de este ecosistema.
El dosel del bosque es un espacio diseñado para que los animales puedan desarrollar comportamientos naturales, como lo es desplazarse entre árboles, entre lianas, entre diferentes estructuras, como lo harían en su hábitat natural. Este espacio está diseñado para que las diferentes especies de primates cuenten con las condiciones de bienestar adecuadas y para que nuestros visitantes puedan aprender un poco más de lo que son las especies de primates colombianas y cómo las cuidamos acá en Piscilago. Otra de las características de este espacio es que los animales pueden desarrollar algunas conductas como lo son la braquiación, lo que le permite desplazarse de una manera adecuada entre diferentes estructuras.
Aquí en el dosel del bosque encontraremos 8 de las especies nativas más importantes de Colombia. También aprenderemos acerca de la conservación y preservación de uno de los ecosistemas más importantes, el bosque seco tropical.
Hola, muy buenos días. Sean todos ustedes bienvenidos a este espacio de nuestra comunidad de innovación exposible con subsidio. Como todos los jueves, recuerden, nos encontramos todos semanalmente de 8 a 9 de la mañana los jueves para ver metodologías, tendencias y casos de éxito en innovación y la gestión empresarial. Siempre les reiteramos la importancia de que tan pronto ustedes reciban estas invitaciones, por favor las compartan con sus colegas, compañeros de trabajo, amigos, sus equipos y en general con todas aquellas personas a las que ustedes consideren que la temática del día les puede ayudar para seguir fortaleciendo su rol dentro de las empresas para las cuales todos estamos trabajando. Y quiero iniciar el día de hoy reiterándoles la invitación a participar en nuestra Semana de la Innovación, que estaremos desarrollando la próxima semana, desde el lunes hasta el próximo viernes, donde en cada día vamos a tener una serie de invitados y de personas que van a estar compartiendo con todos nosotros su conocimiento en diferentes temáticas. Recuerden, le voy a pedir aquí al equipo de producción que por el chat de esta conversación nos compartan este link para que ustedes se inscriben, participen, pero ante todo lo compartan con sus equipos de trabajo para tener cada vez una audiencia mucho mayor. Y en este orden de ideas, hoy vamos a tener una conversación muy interesante con Elliot Parker. Elliot es el CEO y fundador de Alloy, una firma de consultoría en los Estados Unidos que trabaja muchísimo bajo esos lineamientos y bajo todas lo que son las teorías de Clayton Christensen, uno de los grandes gurús de la innovación a nivel mundial. Elliot va a estar hablando con nosotros en inglés, pero ustedes van a tener en los iconos de esta plataforma de Zoom la posibilidad de poder seleccionar el idioma en el que quieran escuchar a Elliot. Las personas que manejen muy bien inglés se meten en la parte inferior del menú de Zoom, aparece un mapa mundi, ahí le dan clic y pueden escoger si lo quieren escuchar, perdón, en español o en inglés. Entonces, los invito a que hagamos eso. Y por el otro lado, de antemano quiero darle nuevamente la bienvenida a Elliot. Eh, Muy agradecidos y muy orgullosos de poder contar con su participación en la mañana de hoy. Y sin más preámbulos, Elliot, yo quiero invitarte a abrir la cámara, a abrir el micrófono, a compartir la presentación, porque a partir de este momento, Elliot, esta comunidad está atenta a escucharte. Tenemos personas conectadas por Zoom, otros por YouTube, otros por Teams, y pues nuestra meta es tener una muy buena cantidad de personas en la mañana de hoy. Entonces, Elio, nuevamente, gracias y bienvenido a nuestra comunidad.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Happy to be here, and good morning to all of you wherever you are in the world. I am currently in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the US. Happy to be with you all today. Let me share my slides while we get started here. And make sure that goes. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to begin this morning with a preface, an introduction to say that, as mentioned, I used to work with Clayton Christensen at his firm for many years. And Clay was a brilliant thinker, one of arguably the father of corporate innovation. Came up with the idea of disruptive innovation, wrote the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, 30 years ago. And it was one of the pleasures of my career to be able to work with him, a man whom I admire greatly. And Clay was fantastic at spotting and diagnosing problems. And so when I was we were working together, I'd have big problems I was working with large corporations, trying to help them understand how to be more innovative. And I'd go to Clay and I'd say, Clay, here's the problem I'm working on. And Clay's response often was some version of, I'm glad you're working on that. I don't know what I would do, but here are some theories that might apply. And in a similar style today, I'm going to be introducing some theories, some frameworks, some ideas, some language you can use to talk about innovation in your organizations, to understand why it doesn't work as well as it probably should, and to have the language that you need to persuade others to think about it differently. My goal today is to give you hope, optimism, and a way to proceed and ideally spark some ideas that you can use to build a more resilient organization. That's the title of my presentation today. We're going to be talking about resilience. How do you build an organization that lasts for a long time? As mentioned, I run a company called Alloy Partners. We're a venture builder. We partner with corporations and entrepreneurs to build what we call advantage startups. Why we do that will become clear from this presentation. We believe that startups are fantastic experiment engines, and that corporations that want to access certain types of transformative innovation should be engaging with startups outside the corporation. We do that by building the startups with those corporations from scratch. We've done, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've built 42 companies in our portfolio, 8 venture studios, and finding that this idea of building startups alongside corporations produces higher quality startups than average that achieve good success and then also help the corporations they partner with to do things that would otherwise be very difficult. So 4 things we're going to talk about today. Number 1, messiness, and why we should pursue messiness, why we should invite it to a degree into our organizations, why we should want it to be there, not try to avoid it. Number 2, we'll talk about the importance of running experiments in your organization as a way to uncover knowledge, and that knowledge leads to serendipity. Serendipity is what ultimately helps us generate resilient organizations that have impact in the world, and I'll make that connection and explain why. First, I want to tell you a story. It's a sad story in some ways. But back during the COVID crisis, this was a quote from April 2020 from Jacques Aschenbroich. He was the CEO of a company called Valeo. Valeo makes auto parts for the manufacturing of automobiles. And this is an amazing statement. Now, during COVID, I went back, prior to COVID, I looked at the press releases from companies just before the crisis to see what were they talking about? What were they saying? And found that it was all the things that you would expect. Everything is amazing. We're achieving unprecedented success. Our factories we're just opened a new factory in China. All these amazing accomplishments. No idea that this problem was coming. The crisis in many ways was very hard to predict. And so the companies, most companies around the world were operating in a way where they weren't quite ready or prepared for this crisis. Vallejo was one of those. Now, before the crisis, he says they were manufacturing 8 million products a day using 3 billion components in 191 plants around the world. That is an incredible feat of human ingenuity. 8 million products a day. 3 billion parts. It's hard to comprehend the complexity and how they did that. We think about the grand achievements of humanity over time, the Great Pyramids in Egypt, whatever you want to include in that list. This should be on that list. This is an amazing feat of human ingenuity, but it's something that happens in the background. We don't get to see or notice very much. But you had tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who devoted decades of their lives, of their careers, to incrementally improve this system so that they could produce 8 million parts a day around the world with very little waste in an extremely capital efficient way. So this system was incredibly efficient in the near term. And as we know in retrospect, what happened during COVID when the crisis came is parts of the system broke down, and then the whole thing came to a screeching halt. So what was capital efficient in the near term proved to not be capital efficient when a crisis came or when the world changed around them. And that's important. What we're doing in our companies is we are building our companies optimizing for capital efficiency. Now, if the world were to stay static and not change, that'd be a wonderful strategy. But we know that the world changes. The world is changing, in fact, more quickly than ever. I'll explain why in this presentation. So we should expect problems to come. We should expect crises, and we should be prepared for them. And I would argue that the focus on capital efficiency, at producing profit, very little waste, actually reduces our ability to learn and to become more resilient. We see this across corporations. Now, this is focused on US corporations on this slide. But what we see is that companies are making more money than ever on average. They've gotten really good at generating profit. Over the last 30 or 40 years, we've collectively decided that the most important metric of a company's success is return on invested capital. And as a result, companies are achieving that. They're hitting that metric. Companies in the US have over $7 trillion, I believe now, on their balance sheets, more than ever. So they're making more money than ever, yet at the same time, they're going out of business faster. I have some former colleagues who do a study every few years where they look at the lifespan of companies on the S&P 500, and they found that lifespan over the last few decades has been cut in half. So companies are making more money on average. They're also going out of business faster on average. That is not intuitive. In fact, that seems ironic. It seems like if companies were making more money, they should endure longer. The lesson we can take from this is that focus on profitability and efficiency creates fragile organizations that don't survive crises. They're optimized for the world as it exists in the moment and aren't prepared for changes that come. In a world where change is coming rapidly, this strategy doesn't work. Let me give you an example of how this works in real life. I don't know if anybody in the audience here knows who this is, but this is an amazing gentleman. His name is Hafthor Bjornsson. He is from Iceland. And in this video, what he's doing is he's breaking the world's record for heaviest deadlift. Now, he's since gone on to break this record again a few times. But at the time, this was a big deal, and people wondered if anybody would ever be able to beat this record again. This is something that nobody in the history of the world had ever done before. The thing about Hafthor Bjornsson, his nickname in the US is the Mountain for good reason. He's enormous. He's got certain genetic aspects that make him more likely to break the world's record for heaviest deadlift than probably most of us on this call. At the time of this lift, in fact, it was 6 feet 9 inches tall. I'm not sure what that is in metric, but it's really tall. He weighed 450 pounds, so about 200 kilos. He was enormous. And in order to be able to do this lift, he had to choose hardship. He had to make some difficult choices. He wasn't born at 450 pounds, 200 kilos. He had to choose to eat 10,000 calories a day for a couple of years. Now, that might sound like fun. That is a very hard thing to do. That's like 6 full meals a day that he was eating in order to pack on the muscle to be able to do this lift. He was putting his body through, for a couple of years, putting his body through incredibly intense workouts that were literally tearing down the muscles so that those muscles could rebuild stronger and create new connections with his brain so that his body could do this hard thing. Now, what you don't see in the video is that when Hafthor walked off the stage, he began bleeding from his eye sockets because of the strain of the lift. That is choosing hardship. Had Hafthor Bjornsson chosen to avoid pain, to avoid strain, to avoid tension in his life, he never would have been able to do this hard thing. He chose to do something very difficult. He set a goal. He knew it required choosing some hardship in his life and inviting that in to the point where he bled from his eye sockets. I hope that none of you ever bleed from your eye sockets, but it's a memorable analogy for the way that we run our businesses, because in our businesses, you can't achieve great things without putting the system under tension, without choosing hardship. The same is true in weightlifting, it's true in business, it's true in our personal lives. We don't grow without tension. Yet we manage our companies with the belief that we can do the opposite, that we can avoid making errors, that we can avoid stress and tension in the system and still somehow learn and gather insights. And that is false. You think about those of you who went to business school and got an MBA. If I were to summarize one of the lessons of business school, it's that you want to run your companies in a way that avoids making errors. You want to root errors out of the system. In fact, the optimal, you'll be taught in business school, the optimal amount of errors in a company is 0. You want to make no mistakes. And somehow we believe that you can also at the same time learn as the world adjusts and continue to grow and do hard things. It's not true. This simple graphic here is from an insights researcher named Gary Klein who built this. Show how it's false. You cannot simultaneously reduce errors and hope that you will increase insights. It turns out that we gather insights by making mistakes, by making errors, by putting the system under tension. That's how we learn. And if you want to learn and be able to adjust and build a resilient organization that's ready for the problems that are going to come, you need to accept a certain amount of errors in the system. This is important. The future is going to be much weirder than any of us can possibly imagine. It's going to get here a lot faster than we think. Let me tell you just a quick story on this to illustrate the point. I had a friend years ago from Haiti. And when he was living in Haiti, he now lives in the United States. At the time he was living in Haiti, around the year 2000, he was going to university. And the government came to one of his professors and said, we need help preparing a national emergency plan for the country of Haiti. So this professor selected my friend, several other students, some other professors, and they set about putting together an emergency plan for the country of Haiti. Now, the first thing they had to do is think about, well, what type of emergency should we design a plan for? And this was going to be an important way. They wanted something that would provoke some hard thinking, but also be somewhat realistic so that they could feel like they were prepared if that were to happen. And so they sat down and thought, well, how about a volcano erupting in Haiti? That might be something useful to prepare for. They said, well, that hasn't happened in eons. We haven't had any volcanoes erupt. What about hurricanes? Well, hurricanes happen all the time. We kind of know what to do. How about earthquakes? Earthquakes don't happen that often. And so as they sat there and thought about it, the worst disaster they could imagine was 12 inches of snow falling on Haiti in 24 hours. Now, they knew this wasn't a realistic thing, but they thought this was a good scenario to plan around. Now, my friend who lives in the United States, in the part of the US where it snows all the time, thinks this is funny now, in retrospect, that they thought this would be such a terrible thing, 12 inches of snow in 24 hours. But they built a plan around this. And the plan involved, well, people would need blankets. We'd need shovels to remove the snow and things like this. And they put together a plan. They submitted it to the government. The government, probably put it on a shelf. We had kind of done the task to think through an emergency. Of course, the sad part of the story is that about a decade later, there was a massive earthquake in Haiti that killed as many as 300,000 people. And the country was unprepared for that disaster. It's very hard to predict the types of crises that are coming our way. It's very hard to predict the kinds of problems that we will encounter. What we know is that problems are inevitable. They are coming our way. We need to be prepared. We need to be prepared that the future is going to be very, very strange. It's going to present new problems to us that we can't yet imagine. The future is going to come here very quickly. I want to present an idea for why we should expect the future to change very quickly. There's two drivers of the pace of innovation, the pace of change in a society. Number one is the connectivity in the network. So how many people are in the network and how easy is it for them to exchange ideas? Number two, the quantity of technology building blocks. How many good ideas are already out there that we can share and then build upon? And so if you think about, go back to ancient Egypt, between, let's say 2500 BC and 500 BC, if you were living in ancient Egypt, there wasn't a lot of change over that 2,000 years in terms of the technologies that were available, in terms of even some of the cultural and religious aspects, the clothing that was worn. Things changed very slowly. And the reason why is that there just weren't a lot of people. It was hard for them to exchange ideas. There weren't easy ways to exchange ideas with someone who was far away. And then secondly, there weren't a lot of technology building blocks. In ancient Egypt, they had to invent things like spoons and tables and marshmallows. They did invent marshmallows in Egypt. So things like that, they just didn't exist before. They had to come up with. We are the grateful recipients of those building blocks today. But at the time, technology progressed slowly for those reasons. Fast forward to today, 2026. Think about how connected we all are, and think about how many ideas we have to build upon and to share. I can pick up my phone and I can have a face-to-face conversation through technology on a screen, but with just about anybody in the world for free. Here we are talking across the planet at very little cost, sharing ideas. That's remarkable. And we've got access to all the information in the world, each one of us individually. AI only accelerates this, right? So what happens in a world where we're all connected, we can share ideas easily, and we've got access to every idea ever generated? The answer is we don't know. This has never happened before. But what we do know is that we should expect things to change very, very quickly. There's a good quote here from Ray Kurzweil, who calls himself a futurist. Got a lot of good ideas about how things change. And what he says here is the rate of change of progress accelerates because humans can use the technology at their disposal to progress faster than previous generations could without the technology. The important thing about this quote is that he does not say the amount of progress accelerates. He says the rate of change of progress accelerates. We're not talking about linear growth and change. We're talking about exponential growth and change. When you have connectivity and you have a solid base of ideas to share, change happens exponentially. It's very hard for our brains to process this. Our brains think in linear terms. In fact, if you think about, we live through a lot of these exponential growth curves right now. This is a good example of one that we all live through. And it's something that we look back in retrospect and we can notice the change and the difference, but in the moment, very, very difficult to perceive. These two photos, you may have seen these before, both at the same location, similar types of events, the changing of the Pope in Rome. On the left-hand side in 2005, you see some signs of what's going to come. You can see the light from some screens in the audience. 8 years later, we've completely changed the way that we interact with the world, for better or for worse. Everybody's got a phone out, some type of device they're using to record the event. A complete change in 8 years, how we interact with and perceive the world around us. An exponential growth curve. Hard to notice in the moment, but when we look back, we can see it. We're living through a lot of these right now. As I mentioned, it's hard for our brains to understand this and to perceive it when we're in the middle of it. What it feels like in the moment is things are changing. We see progress around us. We see new inventions being unveiled, but we can't predict very well how that might impact our future. What's actually happening often is what you see on the right. Things are changing at an exponential rate, and it's hard for us to understand and to appreciate that growth. Let me give you another example of an exponential growth curve that we are all living in. This is one of the most amazing charts I've ever seen. And this is tracking world GDP, gross domestic product, over the last 2,000 years. This is an impossible number to calculate with any degree of accuracy, but I think directionally, this chart is correct. And what it shows is that the world has become incredibly wealthier over the last 50 years, 100 years. In fact, if you think about the lives of your great-grandparents compared to your life today, they would have been amazed at the things that you have access to, and how wealthy the world has become. It may not feel like that to us every day, but compared to how our ancestors were living 100, 200 years ago, the world is so much wealthier than it once was. There's an idea that's been discussed where if you were to go back to the year 1000, for example, and you were to take someone and enable them to travel through time to the year 1500, 500-year span, they probably wouldn't notice very much of a difference. They'd understand how things work. They'd know how the society is functioning. They'd understand the jobs that people are doing. Take someone from 1500 and bring them to the year 2000, and the world would be so different, their brain might explode. People flying in the air in vehicles, the ability to call people and talk to people over a device around the world, to have real-time access to understand something that might be happening in another part of the world. These are things that would have seemed like magic. So as that technology increases, the world becomes incredibly wealthier. Now, if you think about it, the drivers of this curve don't seem to be going anywhere. The future is not predetermined. It is up to us to shape the future, of course. And we should all want to be good ancestors for those yet to come. We have a moral duty, I think, to build a better future for those yet to come. But if you think about the drivers of this curve, we shouldn't expect them to change. And so if you fast forward, this curve continues at the current pace. Think about the lives of our great-grandchildren 100 years from now and how wealthy the world will be in which they live. It's hard for us to understand or to comprehend. It would kind of be like someone from the 1500 going to the year 2000. If we were to fast forward 100 years, our brains might explode because the world's going to be very, very different than we might expect. It's going to be much stranger than we can predict because our brains have a hard time understanding these exponential curves, which is why it matters that we need to be prepared for changes that come. Let me just, a quick aside on this. Let me just stress an important point. Let me talk about the nature of problems for a minute. There's a philosopher in the UK named David Deutsch who's written a fantastic book called The Beginning of Infinity. David Deutsch is an amazing thinker. He is one of the inventors of quantum computing, among other ideas. And he talks a lot about the nature of problems. He says three things about problems. Number one, problems are inevitable. They're going to come our way no matter what. We can't predict them. Problems are coming. And so we should adopt a stance of problem readiness to be able to be prepared for any problem that may come. Often in our organizations, think about it, we adopt a stance of problem avoidance rather than problem preparedness. Number two, all problems are solvable within the laws of physics. So think about back to my friend in Haiti with the earthquake that they experienced in the country. I can imagine a future where we will have the knowledge and the ability to predict earthquakes. And in the future, 300,000 people won't die in an earthquake anymore because we'll be able to predict it. But we haven't figured out how to solve that problem yet. We lack the knowledge needed to address and solve that problem. Number three, problems are beneficial drivers of progress. We should seek out problems because when we solve problems, problems help us to advance and to learn, just like Hafthor Bjornsson doing the world's heaviest deadlift. When we solve problems, we put the system under tension, we can learn and advance. So problems are inevitable, all problems are solvable, problems are beneficial drivers of progress. And so if we want to build resilient organizations, we need to be prepared for problems that might arise. The way that we do that is by gathering as much knowledge and wealth as possible to be prepared for any knowledge or any problem that might happen, especially those problems that we can't yet predict. So how do you put the system under tension to be able to gather the knowledge? That's what we're going to talk about through the rest of the presentation. But first, I want to compare two different philosophies of running large organizations embodied in these two leaders, both of whom are fantastic leaders, are proven ability to convince people of a vision and to follow and pursue that vision. Jack Welch was the CEO of a company called General Electric back in the 1980s and 1990s, one of the world's largest and at the time most successful corporations. And Jack Welch believed that his role as CEO was to root out mistakes from the organization. His job as CEO was to make sure that everything was as predictable as possible, and that as a result, the organization would be run more safely and therefore more likely to endure for a long time. He was completely wrong on this point. And he went so far as to say, as quoted here, that variance is evil. What he meant by that is variance in performance or unexpected results is evil. It's a misuse of investors' trust and capital. And I would argue that this statement is actually evil. And the reason why is that humans don't thrive in organizations that have rooted out all errors from the system. That's what you might call a sterile organization. And think about a surgical room where we do surgery. Those rooms are sterile. What that means is there's no life inside. Those rooms are dead. Sterility is death. Organizations that have rooted out all mistake making are dying, even if the executives don't know it yet. Those executives are hospice workers. They're managing a decline. They don't realize it often, but they're managing a decline because they've rooted out errors. Humans don't thrive in the system. The organization is no longer learning. If the world had stopped progressing in 1986, General Electric would still be a very important company and achieving tremendous success in that world. But as we've discussed, the world continues to change, and GE wasn't ready for those changes. They had stopped learning as an organization because they were so focused on efficiency, on predictability. And ironically, that produced an organization that proved over time to be incredibly fragile. Now contrast that with Reed Hastings. Reed Hastings is the CEO and founder of a company called Netflix. Many of you may be users of Netflix. And Netflix is an amazing company for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that they've gone through multiple transformations of their business model, meaning they've started with one way to create and capture value and have changed the business to completely different ways of creating and capturing value. They began, as everybody knows, by shipping DVDs through the mail. They then shifted their business model to do digital distribution of content. It was tremendously controversial at the time when they announced this, by the way. Obvious in retrospect. At the time, the market did not appreciate this announcement the way that they did it. They then went through another transformation. They went from shipping content digitally to producing content, completely different business model. Now, it remains to be seen if they'll be able to make the next transformation, of course, in the face of AI and video games and all the changes happening in entertainment and content creation. We'll see. But along the way, Reed Hastings had a very interesting thing to say. He said, at Netflix, we manage chaotically. He said, chaos is welcome to a degree as long as that chaos is fertile. He said, in the long term, fertile will beat sterile. And so what Reed Hastings realized was that the proper amount of mistake making in an organization is not zero. It's also not 100%. You don't want to be making mistakes all the time, but it's actually somewhere in the middle. The problem is in most of our organizations, we're pursuing sterility. We're trying to root out all errors from the system. But in the long term, as Reed Hastings said, fertility will beat sterility. So we want to welcome a certain amount of chaos, a certain amount of mistake making that leads us to generate the insights and knowledge we need to achieve success and long-term resilience. So I'll give you, just to reinforce this goes back to this idea of problems. You think about over the course of history, go back, every ancient civilization failed for the same reason. They all failed because they lacked the knowledge and wealth they needed to deal with problems that might arise. And then the problems stacked up in the form of invading people, internal political strife, natural disasters, until a problem came that was so big, the civilization lacked the knowledge and the wealth to deal with that problem that the civilization collapsed. That was the final straw that took the civilization out. Now, the same is true about our civilization, by the way. It is our responsibility to continue collecting as much knowledge and wealth as possible so that we can be prepared for any problem that might arise in the future, especially problems that we can't predict. The same is true in our businesses. Businesses fail because they lack the knowledge and the wealth to deal with problems that arise. No business ever failed because it learned too much. So the goal in our companies, if we want to build a resilient organization, is to gather knowledge and wealth. And it's important to think about in your organization, how do we do that? How do we gather knowledge and wealth? Whose job is it to gather wealth? Whose job is it to gather knowledge? How do those functions work? And that's an in-depth topic maybe for another day. So the key to long-term resilience, building an organization that can endure for a long time, is gathering knowledge, gathering wealth to deal with any problem that may arise. Back to my earlier point, what David Deutsch said, just to reinforce this, problems are inevitable, problems are solvable within laws of physics. To the extent they lead to novel solutions, problems are beneficial drivers of progress. So if you want your organization to endure for a long time, don't adopt a stance of problem avoidance like Jack Welch advocated for. You need to adopt a stance of problem readiness by gathering knowledge and wealth to be prepared. Now, here's the thing. We think about the future and we try to predict what might happen in the future. We do this a lot in our companies. We will sit down. In fact, I might argue that every business investment decision we make is some form of a bet on how we think the future is going to play out. And so we want to understand the future. And so we will sit down and we'll debate the future. We'll try to understand what could happen. We'll look at data to see if we can predict. The problem is that data only tells us about the past. There is no data about the future. The only way that you get data about the future is by creating that data. And you create data about the future by taking action, not sitting in a room and debating. You create data about the future by building things. You take action in the form of experiments, and you do those experiments as a way to convert assumptions about the future into knowledge about the future. At Alloy Partners, we say to our corporate partners, our entrepreneurs, and to our team all the time, action creates data. Action creates data about the future and helps us understand how things are going to change and to be better prepared. So to wrap up, let me share kind of a final example or story here of how we see this play out in nature. I think we can learn a lot from nature and resilient systems in nature in particular. This is a photo of the Amazon that I took in Peru several years ago. I traveled with my son, who at the time was preparing to go to university. His goal is to become an entomologist. He's just finishing his master's degree and on his way to becoming an entomologist now. An entomologist is a scientist who studies insects. And so we went down to the Peruvian Amazon to purposefully seek out and look for insects. It sounds like a crazy thing to do. We got on a plane, flew to a town called Iquitos, and then took a boat for 4 or 5 hours down the river to this remote spot in the Amazon jungle where we looked for insects. Now, this particular part of the Amazon is known by scientists as being one of, if not the most biodiverse place on the planet. You see, over the eons, this particular part of the Amazon has remained relatively stable in terms of its climate and its humidity. Other parts of the Amazon have gotten wetter, drier. They've changed over time. This part has stayed the same, and as a result, it's flourished in terms of the diversity of life. There are more kinds of monkeys, of birds, and of insects in this particular part of the Amazon than just about anywhere else in the world. And so scientists from around the world travel to this place to study the life forms. And if you ever have the chance, if you haven't been, I highly recommend that you go. So this is how we would find insects in the jungle. We'd take a white sheet, hang it between 2 trees, and shine a light on that sheet. Within minutes, the sheet would be covered by insects. Now, had I known at the time I would be using photos from this trip in presentations one day, I would have done a better job of taking the photos. This was right after we turned the light on. Had I taken a photo a little bit later, you would have seen even more insects in the photo. Now, I was out there. I was completely covered up. The only thing touching the air was my eyeballs. I did not want the bugs covering me. My son, on the other hand, was loving it. He was out there in shorts and a t-shirt covered in insects. We are We are all made a little bit differently. This was an amazing experience finding these insects because we saw insects of unimaginable variety. Some that are designed to blend into their surroundings, others that are designed to stick out, some with appendages, some with wild colors, just an incredible diversity of life. Now, here's the important thing I think to realize that's relevant to our discussion today. The Amazon jungle, because of this diversity of life, is incredibly resilient. Almost no matter what we do as people, the Amazon, this part of it at least, will continue to thrive because of this diversity of life. And what I would argue is that this diversity of life is a form of wealth for the jungle. This diversity of life is a signal that the Amazon has found a way to collect knowledge about all the possible ways of surviving and reproducing within the constraints that exist in this ecosystem. You might argue, we sometimes think that natural selection has an objective in mind, and that objective is to find the organism that is best designed to thrive and to proliferate in the ecosystem in which it exists. And that's not true. If that were true, natural selection would have stopped with single-celled organisms a long time ago. Those single-celled organisms are incredibly robust. They're very good at reproducing. And so this diversity of life is a testament that something else is going on, something that maybe we can learn from. And what happens is that this natural selection process is not driven by some objective. It's as a random walk from where the ecosystem last stood. The ecosystem is running experiments in the form of mutations to uncover different ways of existing in this ecosystem. If you run enough experiments, you're going to discover that it's helpful to perceive light, right, as a way to navigate the ecosystem, and organisms that perceive light will be better able to thrive within the circumstances that exist. And the reason I bring up this example is that I would argue that in our organizations, in our companies, the way that we pursue innovation with the goal of resilience in mind is we do it in the complete opposite way of what we see the Amazon doing naturally. Let me explain what I mean. 3 lessons I think we can learn from the Amazon and the way that it develops resilience through innovation, through mutations, through experiments. Number 1, in the Amazon, there are no objectives. There are only constraints. What I mean by that is there's only a certain amount of air, of water, of sunlight the organisms in that ecosystem have to compete for. And as a result, the competition is fierce, and that results in organisms that are fit for that environment. In our large companies, we are often pursuing innovation in a way that is objectives driven, is hierarchical, is command and control. It's not random. Now, there are good reasons for why we pursue it that way, but it produces very different types of outcomes. In the Amazon, lots of experimentation happens, lots of successes, lots of failures. In our large organizations, we pursue it very differently, objectives driven, and as a result, we often overlook opportunities that seem unattractive. I'll give you an example of this. I was meeting with the leaders of a large food manufacturer, global presence, and they were telling me that they cannot pursue any new product that won't produce at least $50 million in revenue in year 1, $50 million in revenue. And as a result, they showed me a chart. They can predict all the trends in food. They know where all the new categories are existing. They showed for the next 20 years, here's the type of changes in the food that we eat that we think are going to matter to consumers. And they felt like they can't pursue any of them because none of them initially are going to be attractive enough to help them achieve their near-term objectives of augmenting revenue by at least $50 million a year. And so they feel stuck. They're not pursuing these things, and they're waiting instead to do very expensive acquisitions years later from the companies, the startups that are able to act on these opportunities. So when we pursue innovation with firm objectives in mind, we miss out on opportunities. Number 2, in the Amazon, experimentation happens at the margins. What I mean by that is mutation happens at the level of individual organisms or cells. And if that mutation fails, it's too bad for the organism involved, but the ecosystem is fine. In fact, you might argue the ecosystem's better off having learned from that mutation. And now, if that mutation is successful, the ecosystem, of course, is poised to adopt it and to let it proliferate. Think about how we do this differently in our organizations. Inside large companies, especially, experimentation is often centralized. No matter whether it succeeds or fails, it's very, very expensive. Mutation in the Amazon is inexpensive and cheap. Ideas are cheap. Inside of our companies, we make it very expensive. By centralizing it, we miss out on that type of knowledge gathering. Number 3, novelty compounds over time. In other words, the things that the Amazon learns through a mutation, the best mutations result in further mutations. The best experiments result in more experiments. That knowledge compounds and helps expand the breadth of the knowledge the Amazon has, and then helps it to be better prepared for problems that might come in the future, especially problems that we can't yet predict. That novelty compounds over time, just like any form of investment. Now, think about in our organizations when we run experiments. I talk to a lot of leaders who will say, oh, we run experiments in our organization. Our innovation team's running experiments all the time. But when you really get into the experiments that they're running, what you find is that most of the time those experiments are designed to reinforce what the organization already knows. Those experiments aren't designed to produce new information, new knowledge. They're not designed to put the system under tension or stress. They're not designed to produce a certain degree of chaos. They're designed to reinforce what we already believe about the future, to help us feel better about the way that we're running our business. If you're running experiments to reinforce what you already know, you are wasting your time and your money. The best experiments help us uncover anomalies, and those anomalies lead to knowledge that compounds over time. So if you want to build a resilient organization, you need to run more experiments. Those experiments help you uncover anomalies, surprises about the way the world works, things you didn't know before. They help you uncover truths about the world. Those anomalies create knowledge. That knowledge, if you get enough of it, generates insights. And once you have enough insights, it's very hard to predict ahead of time which insights are going to matter most. But if you have enough insights, you're gathering enough knowledge that leads to insights, those insights generate and create serendipity. They create opportunities for the organization to go do new and different things. And that serendipity is what drives long-term resilience. When you think about the way you run experiments in your organization, if I were to summarize the whole point of this presentation, is that if you want to be better prepared for the future, you need to be running more experiments. I don't care how many experiments you're running in your organization right now, I would bet a lot of money that you probably should be running more than you are. And those experiments should be fast, cheap, and weird. Fast, I think that's obvious what that means. That we should be running experiments that produce rapid results, that produce rapid conversion of assumptions about the future into knowledge about the future. We want to learn quickly. Number 2, those experiments should be inexpensive. And number 3, those experiments should be weird. And what I mean by that is that they should be challenging the status quo. They should be designed to question what we believe. Here's a good test for you. Think about the types of activities you're pursuing in terms of innovation in your organization. Ask yourself, what is the deepest truth of our organization? What is the thing that we believe that everybody would agree to in the organization? It might be something like consumers want a product that looks like X. Take that assumption and think about what would the opposite be? And what if the opposite were true? Just use that as a way to challenge your thinking. Could we run an experiment to see if the opposite might be true? That might seem crazy on its face because we've got this truth that we just generally universally accepted in the organization. But I will tell you, there are startups out there around the world that are taking the opposite bet and learning very quickly about alternative ways of considering the future. So your experiments should be designed to be weird. The hypothesis in those experiments almost doesn't matter. What matters more is the action, the activity that generates the data about the future that helps you uncover anomalies. I want to leave with a quote, and then we'll open it up to questions. John Wooden was a basketball coach in the United States. He coached at my alma mater, UCLA, in California. and he's the winningest basketball coach in college basketball history. I love this quote from John Wooden because it's very counterintuitive. What he says is the team that makes the most mistakes usually wins because doers make mistakes. It's counterintuitive because when we think about winning teams, we think about those are the teams that don't make any mistakes. Those are the teams that go out and execute a perfect game. What John Wooden's arguing here is that no, the opposite is true. Winners are the teams that make a lot of mistakes, especially in the preparation, because when problems arise, they're ready. And so think about your organization. Are you prepared for the future? The future is going to be much stranger than we can imagine. It's coming faster than we think. We can't predict the future very well. There is no data about the future. So what types of actions are you taking right now to be better prepared? What types of mistakes are you making right now to uncover the learning, the knowledge that you need to be prepared for the problems that are inevitably coming our way? I just want to end on one last note. I think we have, I alluded to this earlier, I think we all have a duty to be optimistic. And it's the reason why we have a duty is that being optimistic forces us to be good ancestors, to create a better world for those yet to come. And by optimism, I don't mean that we expect everything to be good from here on out. Optimism, in fact, is an understanding that problems are inevitable, they are coming our way, but that our capacity to address problems can increase and will increase over time if we are making an effort to increase our knowledge. I'm optimistic because I believe that yes, problems are inevitable. The problems that come will be stranger than we can imagine, but that our capacity to address those problems will continue to increase. And if you go back through history, on average, the optimists have been much more correct than the pessimists. If you want to be right about the future, and I think we all should want to be right about the future, you should be optimistic. You're more likely to be correct. And with that, I will wrap up. I'll put my contact information on here. If anybody would like to reach out and ask questions or get in touch, let me know. And why don't we spend a few minutes taking any questions that we might have from the audience? I haven't been tracking the chat. There may be questions in the chat too.
Ya nos están, perdón, Federico, ya nos están empezando a llegar porque hay varios canales de formulación de preguntas. Y una de las primeras que nos llegan es,
I have,
Elliot,
yeah, I've got
muy
a book
agradecidos.
called The Illusion of Innovation that talks about a lot of these ideas. It's a quick read. The Illusion of Innovation available anywhere. The Illusion of Innovation. Yeah,
Listo,
working on a
perfecto.
second book at
No,
the
entonces por
moment
acá nos escribe
on the
Carlos
power of
Castro
entrepreneurs.
por WhatsApp.
The
Listo,
atomic
perfecto. Bueno,
unit of
bueno,
innovation.
Carlos nos hace esta pregunta. Ok, perfecto. Bueno, no, entonces Carlos nos hace esta pregunta y es, ¿cuál es la diferencia entre la innovación, mejoramiento continuo y los procesos tradicionales de optimización? ¿Cómo ve Elliot esa diferencia y con qué criterios o variables uno debería identificar cuando estoy innovando, cuando estoy optimizando, cuando estoy haciendo mejoramiento continuo?
Fantastic question. Continuous improvement is a form of innovation, and corporations are very, very good at that type of innovation. You might think about three kinds of innovation Clayton Christensen described. One is efficiency innovation, where we are doing things faster, better, cheaper. Corporations are incredible at efficiency innovation. Another type of innovation is performance improvements, performance improving innovation. Think about the new car model that comes out this year that's better than the car model that came out last year. Corporations are amazing at that type of innovation. Those two kinds of innovation are critical to our future. Most of the innovation that we benefit from in our lives comes from those forms of innovation. They're really important. Corporations do them very well. The third type of innovation, corporations are terrible at. And that type of innovation is what you might call market creation innovation, or sometimes business model transformation. It's new ways of creating and capturing value in the world. Startups are very good at that type of innovation because it requires learning and mistake making. And what we often see, I see CEOs of big companies making the mistake all the time. They tell their teams, we need to act more like a startup so we can do that type of innovation better. That is a mistake. Most startups fail. You don't want your corporation to fail. But at corporations, what you can do is find ways to access startups through partnership investment, sometimes through building external ventures, which is what we do with corporations, as a way to access that type of innovation that is almost impossible to do inside a corporation very well.
Ok. Bueno, aquí vengo justamente hablando de startups. Estamos en Medellín en un evento donde se reúnen algo más de 400 startups de Colombia y Latinoamérica que se están presentando. Y alguien de este evento, uno de los organizadores, quiere formular esta pregunta. Desde su punto de vista, Elliot, ¿cómo se puede articular cada vez más a las grandes corporaciones para que efectivamente abran sus puertas a las startups y puedan trabajar coordinadamente y con objetivos comunes?
Yeah, very good question. That's the topic of my second book is enabling corporations to better understand why they should be working with entrepreneurs. My whole thesis there is that the atomic unit of innovation is an entrepreneur inside a startup, acting with autonomy, with skin in the game, with passion, with urgency, and with the freedom to be wrong, to make mistakes. None of those things can be replicated inside a large corporation for very good reason. And if you remove any of those elements, the atomic unit of innovation fails. I think it's almost like alchemy. Think about the alchemists back in the Middle Ages. They were trying to change lead into gold. And it turns out it doesn't work. That you're much better off just going and finding gold. We think about in corporations, we can perform alchemy by turning this thing, and not that corporations are lead, but by turning the thing into something else that it's not. It's much better to just access the core element through acquisition, investment, partnership, or by building new startups from scratch. And I think we need to recognize, if you look at the last 30 years of our innovation success, think about companies around business model transformation. Think about how many examples you can consider of large organizations that have successfully transformed their core business model, gone from one way of creating and capturing value to a new way of creating and capturing value. Very, very few. Yet they all have innovation teams operating whose goal is to pursue that type of transformation. And so my argument is that that process, that approach doesn't work. And we need to be realistic about it, because organizations are wasting tremendous time and money and energy in pursuit of business model transformation. Think about the examples where there was success of business model transformation. Almost none of them came from an innovation team. And I don't want to dishearten those of you who are working on innovation teams, but I think you need to be realistic about what the corporation is good for and can do, and what startups can do. And you're much better off if you take a realistic view of it and recognize that, especially now, the future of the corporation is more about coordination of outside assets, including startups, than it is about controlling those assets inside the corporation. It's just the nature of the way things are changing because of technology.
Ok. Por acá surge en el chat de esta llamada una pregunta que nos hace alguien, bueno, no está identificada la persona, pero dice, ¿cómo incentivar la inversión en innovación en pequeñas y medianas empresas, donde hay limitaciones de recursos y donde los retornos en ocasiones no son tan visibles y concretos?
Yeah, in small businesses, the good news is it's much easier to innovate. Because you have less to preserve than a large corporation does. Incentives can come in multiple forms. There is, you think about the incentives tied to compensation, which can happen in the form of cash, salary, bonus, in the form of equity interest in the business, or in the form of profits sharing, profits interest in the business. Those are the cash forms of incentives. And that's what we often think about. Those are important. So you can think about how to optimize those to make sure that everybody's success is aligned around long-term performance. But there's also the non-cash incentives that matter a lot. It is really fun to work on things that feel innovative and different and new. And there's a lot of non-cash incentives for the right type of people who are wired to want to do those things, to go pursue that type of activity. So if you're finding that you're wanting to innovate inside a small, medium business, you're having a hard time generating the cash you need to do cash compensation, you may not have the right people who are incentivized just around the type of work that comes and the excitement of doing new things. And so you may look to see do we have the right people in place to pursue this type of activity or not?
Okay. Bueno, Elliot, nuevamente mil gracias por estar con nosotros en la mañana de hoy. Ojalá esta sea la primera de varias conversaciones que podamos sostener acá esta comunidad. Nos reunimos todas las semanas y vamos conversando de diferentes temas. Será todo un gusto seguir compartiendo contigo. Entonces, nuevamente, mil gracias por haber estado con nosotros en la mañana de hoy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Pleasure's all mine. Appreciate the opportunity. Good luck to all of you.
Gracias, Elliot. Muchas gracias a ti por todo. Y bueno, amigos, miembros de la comunidad, ahora procedemos ya a terminar nuestra conversación de hoy. Primero vamos a hacer la encuesta que hacemos todas las semanas, básicamente evaluando cómo fue nuestro evento del día de hoy. Hoy alcanzamos a tener algo más de 300 personas conectadas en directo. Y recuerden que las personas, mientras ustedes van diligenciando la encuesta, voy a irles comentando algunos temas. Por un lado, decirles a las personas que no vieron esto en vivo, que lo quieren volver a revisar, estas conversaciones quedan grabadas en YouTube y le voy a pedir aquí al equipo de producción, si por favor por el chat nos deja ese link para que ustedes puedan volver a revisar la conversación, tomar nuevamente notas, hacer nuevas reflexiones, porque yo creo que es de muchísima utilidad. Por el otro lado, reiterarles la invitación a nuestros próximos eventos. La próxima semana, entonces, recuerden, de lunes a viernes estaremos haciendo eventos virtuales toda la semana. Compártalos, ayúdenos a difundir entre sus empresas, sus equipos de trabajo, sus colegas, sus amigos. Ya para el 30 de abril cerraremos este mes con una conversación con Marco Vinicio de Borealis acerca de cómo elegir los problemas correctos como punto de partida de la innovación. En mayo estaremos con Frank Mates hablando de cómo gestionar la innovación, pero muy focalizados en asegurar resultados. Y el 14 de mayo estaremos hablando con la gente de Entity Data del Perú acerca de las próximas disrupciones muy asociados al tema de la computación cuántica. Entonces, reitero la invitación a que ustedes se inscriban, se registren, participen activamente en nuestra Semana de la Innovación y nos seguiremos viendo en próximas ocasiones. Entonces, nuevamente, les dejamos aquí los links y realmente vamos a seguir trabajando muy fundamentados en detectar con ustedes esas temáticas sobre las cuales ustedes consideran vale la pena tener en esta comunidad, que es una comunidad gratuita, abierta, se conectan personas de diferentes países del mundo. Hoy vi por acá en las conversaciones del chat que efectivamente había personas de Argentina, de Perú, de Ecuador, de Centroamérica. Entonces todos ustedes son bienvenidos a esta comunidad. Entonces nuevamente un abrazo muy grande y nos veremos la próxima semana, el lunes a viernes. Vamos a tener eventos todos los días. Inscríbanse, revisen la agenda y seguimos en contacto en esta comunidad. Un fuerte abrazo para todos y nos veremos la próxima semana. Muy buen día para todos.